Frost. Let me tell you a little bit about who this next speaker is. He's going to be picking up on one of the things that Maeve talked about, which was that thing of people seeking organizations that have meaning, that they understand the purpose of the organization. And one of those things that is coming up more and more in recruitment and retention surveys and studies is that part of that meaning links to ESG, particularly climate and particularly sustainability. And that's what our next speaker is going to be focusing on, the sustainability agenda, what it means for your organizations, and how you can adopt and inculcate it throughout those organizations. He is originally a naval architect and shipbuilder by trade, and in about 2009 set up EcoMerit, which is a consultancy business that he runs and that has over the years worked with, I think, north of 150 businesses, guiding them through what is often called the sustainability journey. So will you please welcome Mr. Phil Walker, Managing Director of EcoMerit. And Phil, on the expectation that you can hear me, if not see me, I'll hand over to you.
My name is Phil Walker. I, as has been explained, have been running EcoMerit since about 2009, and I'm going to share a screen now, just so you can see the slideshow you want to use. And hopefully you can see that now.
We can.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, what I want to talk about this morning is why a leadership role in climate action is good for business and is in fact good business these days. And I'm going to explain that by example, because example is usually the best way to prove a point, I find. So a little bit about myself first. I set up EcoMerit back in 2009. Prior to that, well, originally I'm an engineer, I'm a shipbuilder, going back a few years now. I worked in the hotel trade for a while. I was in quality assurance for quite a long time, and that brought me into environmental management as well. I used to work for certification bodies, assessing companies for their quality systems and their environmental management systems. So in 2009, I set up EcoMerit. And the purpose of EcoMerit is primarily to help small businesses, SMEs, to become more sustainable and to save money on energy waste and water, and to address the climate challenge. So I'd like to start with just a few observations that really I've built up over the last few years. Firstly, efficiency and resource efficiency. In my opinion, that is the most renewable form of energy there is. So by being more efficient about the energy we're using, and the most efficient energy is the energy you're not using at all. So just switching things off when they're not needed is the most efficient thing you can do for your business. And to me, by looking at what companies do and households, because it applies equally to households, looking at what you're doing, how you're using energy is the most effective thing you can do. Then looking at what energy you're using and so on. SMEs, in my opinion, have been somewhat and still are a somewhat neglected sector in this area. There's not a whole lot of government support for SMEs who are wanting to take leadership roles. Even the grants that are available are actually getting harder to get now rather than easier. And action really is needed, but it's also possible and it's also profitable. Over the last 10 years, we have worked with, as has been said, more than 150 companies to help them achieve these kind of results. And we can show through working with them what is possible with very ordinary companies with very ordinary budgets. We do need to scale this up quickly. We do have a climate crisis on our hands. It is very, very important that instead of just little companies like EcoMerit dealing with a relative handful of small companies, this has got to be scaled up. It's got to be the norm for SMEs to start to do more in terms of climate change, energy efficiency, and so on. And leadership obviously is vital there. And hopefully events like this and organizations like UCD can help with that in a very significant way. And finally, do look up. If I don't know if any of you have seen the recent film about the climate crisis. It's pretty good, but the whole thing to me, the whole message is you need to look up and look around. We all do. We need to be aware of what is happening, what is needed, why it is needed, and why is this urgently needed. Maybe to restate the obvious, because I think sometimes it needs restated. Why is climate action so important? It is about humanity. It's about the survival of the human race as a society. It's about our children. It's about their children. It's just something we have to do. I think we all know that. It's very hard to think there's anyone on the planet who doesn't know this now. And it's just, one still wonders why we aren't doing more quickly. Hopefully we can all help in our own small way, because it all adds up. We cannot just wait for governments to do everything for us. We all need to be taking action. From a business perspective, looking in more detail, there's very, very good business reasons aside of the big reason for doing it. There's big cost savings available by addressing climate action, by becoming more energy efficient. There are big marketing benefits now. Customers and the general public now are becoming more aware of climate change, are starting to ask questions about who they're buying from, what they're buying, where that's coming from. There is definitely more interest there. And the flip side of that is the greenwashing is becoming easier to detect and more apparent and more obvious. I mean, I was watching a Channel 4 program just 2 nights ago about Nike and Adidas and their wonderful recycling initiatives using ocean plastics and so on. And the whole thing was shown very quickly and very easily to be rather an overstatement at the very least, and a sham or greenwashing, as I would see it. So companies can still doing it. There's an awful lot of it around, but they do it at their peril, because people are becoming a bit more savvy to that and a bit more knowledgeable about what real climate action looks like. The other really encouraging thing I've noticed, especially over the last year or so, is issues of recruitment and retention. The jobs market now is a very good one for the employee. Most companies are struggling to find the people that they want and the people with the right skills and qualities that they want. And workers now, especially younger ones, are becoming more and more fussy about who they want to work for. And that in itself is starting to push companies to become more environmentally and socially and governmentally aware. Because if they want to get the people that they need and they want to keep, a lot of them are starting to realize that they need to change their ways in order to be able to attract these people who have a choice, who can go elsewhere. So to me, that's a very important and quite recent change in the jobs market and in the world of business. And finally, compliance. There's legal compliance is obviously very important. And there are situations quite often still of companies falling foul of environmental law. When that does happen, it as well as the fines and so on that are involved, the reputational damage is immense. So there's, I say, it's a bit of a restatement, but sometimes I do think it's best to restate the obvious sometimes. Now, this graph here is, I think, quite a telling one. This shows carbon emissions performance. And the green line here shows the overall energy carbon emissions of the EcoMerit group of companies that we work with over a 10-year period. And you can see over that 10 years collectively, they have reduced their carbon footprint by 60%, which is phenomenal. That works out at about 9% per year improvement. Now, if you bear in mind that our climate action plan, the target for that is 7% per year, then all these little companies, and they're mostly small companies, not all, But all these EcoMerit community members, all these companies have been outperforming that target for the last 10 years, which I think is quite phenomenal. The sad line is the red line along the top, which shows Ireland's performance over the same period. And as a country, we've bumped along and made very little impact on our carbon emissions as a country over the same 10-year period. So it shows we, as a country, we have got a lot to do, but it also shows that companies and SMEs can take a real leadership role in this, because we have proven this more than 100 times over with the 100 or so members that we currently have. So to me, this is a thing to take great heart from. It is actually achievable. Things can happen. So the way EcoMerit is set up, EcoMerit Limited is the company that I work for, and we are set up to serve the EcoMerit community. And that is a community of companies and organizations who have a common interest in improving their environmental performance, reducing their environmental impact. And we're supported by an oversight board, which consists of various people, including academics, members of the EcoMerit community itself, and people with outside expertise. And we have various affiliates and strategic partners that help us on the route. But the whole aim is to improve environmental sustainability of the organizations in our membership. So as I said earlier, the best way to prove a point, I think, is by example. So what I want to spend the next few minutes on is just give you one example of one small company. This is Dunamaise Art Centre in Portlaoise. And I've picked this example for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's one of the first companies that we started working with back in 2009. So we have got a very long history of working with them, and we can show that history. Secondly, they are quite a small organization. They have very tight budgets. They work with support from the Arts Council, from the tickets that they manage to sell, and so on. They don't have a lot of disposable income. They don't have a lot of money to spend. So every penny they do spend on anything is competing for the 10 or 20 other things they could be spending the same money on. So that makes them, to me, a particularly good example, because they're in that sense, they're very representative of most organizations and most small organizations in Ireland today. So if I just take you through, so back in 2009, their energy carbon footprint was just over 140 tons per year. When we started working with them, I started off, as we normally do, by doing a site assessment. I walked around the centre with their technical manager, and we identified savings and improvement opportunities, and they started implementing them. So the first things were the traditional low-hanging fruit, things like just switching off lights that weren't needed to be on, like a lot of back of house lights were left on when not necessary, adjusting boiler timings and settings and so on, all the kind of easy, straightforward stuff. And so you can see here that in the first year, their footprint dropped down quite significantly just through these simple measures. They then started investing. They invested in LED lighting because that's one of the things that gave them the fastest payback. And by doing that, they then dropped their footprint further. They then replaced their main front doors, which were big glass doors with massive air gaps all around them, which were blowing a gale in the winter. And that blew right into the reception area and right into the adjacent cafe, which meant that they had to effectively overheat the place to compensate for that. So they replaced these doors with doors that actually fitted. And again, that reduced their footprint further. They were doing all sorts of other small measures at the same time, but this is just to give you kind of some of the biggest spends and the biggest things they were doing. Then in 2015, they put in a major investment. They replaced their oil boiler with 2 modern gas boilers, and that took full effect in 2017 because it happened halfway through 2016. So you can see there's a big drop in their footprint here through improving their heating system and replacing the boilers. Then they went on to, again, they're investing more in lights. They've done all the big stuff, all the front of house stuff. They're now doing LED lighting for their stage lights and so on, and making further improvements. So overall, over that 10-year period, they've done what they can as they can in a considered and sensible way, looking at value for money, payback, and so on. And in doing so, they've reduced their footprint by, I think it's about 55% over that 10-year period. To me, again, for a small company like that with very limited resources, that to me is a remarkable achievement. What is more remarkable, I think, possibly is this graph. So this shows the same time period, and this shows their net savings over the same period. So back in 2009, they did a lot of zero cost improvements, like switching lights off that weren't needed, improving boiler controls and so on, thermostats. So they started to save money. 2010, they invested in lights. And so for a small period here in 2011, they actually spent more money than they saved. Just this little bit down here in 2011. After that, their lighting investments start to pay off. And so they were savings all the way. They then invested some of these savings in the doors that I talked about. Then they came to the boiler investment in 2015. That was a big investment. So that was a big hit. So that took them right back down again, but still positive. They were still saving money overall. And then from then on, the savings curve goes up even steeper because of the extra savings from the boiler and then further light investments. So over the course of the 10-year period, they were actually €35,000 better off than if they just continued business as usual. So this is after taking into account all their investment and all these improvements. So financially, they're better off. They've reduced their emissions by 54%. They've reduced their water use by 2/3. They've reduced their energy costs by 1/3, which is about 12,500 per year. And they did this during a time where they were actually getting busier. The number of performances they were hosted, the number of events they were hosting had increased by 100%. So you would have expected their costs to have gone up, not down. They also, with our help, achieved SEA grants to help with that, and they achieved about €53,000 worth of grants to help with some of that capital investment. So again, the takeaway from this, I think, is here you have just a very small cash-strapped organization who have made massive achievements within their own scale over a period of time, doing things as they can, when they can, and look at what they've achieved. So the lesson from that is that, taking real action on climate makes excellent business sense, probably especially nowadays with energy prices going up at the rate they are, and also being difficult to predict. I mean, I don't think anyone has any clear idea how much you'll be spending for a kilowatt hour of electricity this time next year. I certainly don't. I suspect it'll be rather more than I'm paying just now, though. So, by addressing these issues, by taking climate action, by improving resource efficiency, you're reducing costs, you're increasing profits, you're future-proofing your business. You're less vulnerable to energy prices, carbon taxes, you're less vulnerable to environmental regulation. And as I mentioned earlier, the kind of softer side of this, which is no less important, staff morale, recruitment, retention, the reputation of the company, meeting customers' expectations, all these things are enhanced and improved by taking action. Another area is looking at green procurement. So companies themselves starting to look at who they are buying from and what their environmental credentials are and what is the impact of their purchases. And also looking at the other way, looking at their customers and saying, who are they selling to and how is their product or service being used and how can that be improved? And an environmental certification, I believe, is very important for this. It helps to remove any accusations of greenwashing, and it has other benefits as well, which I'll explain in a few moments as well. So I'd like to talk a little bit about EcoMerit now and how that works and how this has helped companies like the Dunamaise Arts Centre achieve what they have. Most importantly, it's a very simple system. I mentioned earlier, I used to be an auditor for ISO 14001 environmental systems, amongst others. And this is where the idea of EcoMerit came from. ISO 14001 is the accepted international standard for environmental management systems. It's a very good standard, if you're a large petrochemical company. It's very onerous and very difficult if you're a very small business. It's an awful lot of work and an awful lot of effort with really quite little return. So the whole idea behind EcoMerit was to come up with something that was much simpler, much more usable for small businesses, but which gives you the same results. So it's simple, it's practical, it's rigorous, because it does involve a side assessment, it involves repeat visits every year as well, and it's proven. We've spent the last 10, 12 years proving that it works. The certification principles are exactly the same as the international standards. In fact, EcoMerit is based on it. It's just the international standards with all the bells and whistles removed. And the other focus is on performance. Most standards and the way they're applied is all about compliance. Do you do this? Do you do that? Do you meet this requirement? EcoMerit is much more about performance. It's what was your carbon footprint this year? What is your energy use this year? How much water did you use? How much waste did you create? Now, what are we going to do to improve that next year? And then how are we going to measure that? And that's where we come up with these figures. We've been measuring our performance or the performance of our member companies since year one. And as I say, the 9% year-on-year emissions reductions. So that's over a 10-year period, a 60% reduction. On average, any organisation joining EcoMerit saves 10,000 in their first year alone, just through the improvement actions. And we've won about €2 million in grants aid as well, which has been obviously very important for helping achieve these improvements too. The way EcoMerit works is the member company is basically making 4 simple commitments. Firstly, that they have an environmental policy. If they don't have one, we draft it for them and they then edit it to make it their own. They measure their performance. So they read their meters, they log their oil, diesel, etc. usage, and they monitor that. And then the graph on the right here just shows this is one of our reporting formats, a standard reporting format. So it's the carbon emissions of a company and broken down into premises thermal, electricity, vehicles and plant, business travel, and so on, various other categories that can be measured. And we also have the facility to set a target. So the graph here shows a planned reduction target. This is a mock example, by the way. So you can set your target and then measure your performance year on year against that target. So that's one of the key points, is this measurement and then an improvement plan. So when we do an original assessment, we come up with a draft plan, which the company then decides what it's going to do. Then each year we review that plan with them, identify, okay, what's going to happen next year? What further improvements will be implemented? And to me, that is probably the most important part of the certification element, is the fact that you're not just coming in, doing an assessment and leaving. You're coming back every year to revisit what's happening, help to identify more improvements, help them with any issues they maybe had with some of the improvements planned for last year that maybe didn't work as well as they could have done, and just to keep the whole thing moving. Also, compliance with environmental law obviously is a given. We don't want to be certifying companies who are end up prosecuted by the EPA for something. So the process also is very simple. Once the company applies, we gather information about their energy use, their waste creation, and so on. We carry out a site review and we produce a draft plan. Once that plan is finalized and they have the basic controls in place to get the environmental certification, and thereafter it's an annual surveillance to maintain that certification. And as I say, identify new improvements, give support and encouragement, and keep the whole thing moving and the improvements continuing onwards. And this is, again, the difference, I think, where the certification element comes in, because there's this continuity. There's this coming back every year, where at least once a year you're looking at the whole thing again and deciding on your next steps. It's not just a one-off action. So, I mean, that's what we've done with EcoMerit and the 100 or so companies that are currently members. But what we are doing is very small. It's a drop in the ocean compared with what's required. I mean, Ireland and the SME sector needs to scale up. I mean, SMEs account for, I think it's about 98% of Irish businesses are SMEs. They employ 69% of the Irish workforce. So they're a very, very important part of our climate action commitments. It has to be scaled up. And as I say, it's disappointing there's so little support at the moment, but that's got to change in my view. And we've put together a proposal called CARE, which is Climate Action Through Resource Efficiency. And this envisages scaling up to 10,000 SMEs, so it's 100-fold over where EcoMerit is, so a fairly major commitment. And by doing that, and if these SMEs performed in just exactly the same way as the EcoMerit 100 or so companies we currently have, would save 1 megaton per year of carbon. The cost savings for the companies would be around 500 million per year, and the investment would be about 100 million. Now we're suggesting that 80% of that should come from government and 20% from the individual companies. But that's our kind of our vision for what we believe should be happening and what can happen if SMEs can be given the necessary supports. By the way, I'm not also suggesting that SMEs should just wait for this to happen. We've already proven and shown that SMEs just doing things off their own bat, it's well worth them doing anyway. There are massive savings and improvements to be made. So the key points of CARE would be, again, planning, performance, the whole idea about hand-holding. There's no point in just doing an assessment and writing a report. Companies have to get support beyond that to help them actually implement recommendations, find more improvements, and so on. We're suggesting that government grants and even government contracts should have green ribbons attached to them, so that if you're a company looking for a government contract, you should have good green credentials, otherwise you're not in the running. It's also much easier than domestic retrofitting. I mean, we're investing very heavily just now in upgrading our housing stock, and SEI are very heavily involved in supporting that. But a typical payback time for a deep retrofit of a house is maybe 20 to 30 years, whereas the typical payback time for the projects that we've got grant support for has been about 4 years. So in terms of payback for government money, it outperforms massively the programme to retrofit housing. I'm not suggesting that that shouldn't happen. I'm just saying it shouldn't happen at the expense of SMEs and other companies who can actually deliver more faster for the same support. So in conclusion, efficiency, there's just massive potential for companies of all sizes and households to reduce emissions and costs just by looking at what they're doing, taking a considered approach and kind of planning what gives the best return for money, what can be easily done at zero cost and make a result, and then what are maybe the lower cost items that can be put in that will get a result, and then just gradually moving through and improving year on year. SMEs, I believe, are a fairly neglected sector. I would love to see that change. We're lobbying as much as we can on that. The CARE programme is one of our attempts to do that. And again, UCD and other education establishments and so on, maybe by taking a leadership role as well. And I hope events like today will help there too. It just needs to increase that awareness and to help things to happen. Leadership on climate action is absolutely essential. It's good business, it's good for business. We should all be doing it. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Phil. Phil, can I just confirm that you can hear me okay?
Yeah, I kind of did, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that. There's a couple of things that I want to ask you. I also want to see if we have questions for you from the participants here today. Folks, anybody want to raise anything? Well, while we're waiting, Phil, for questions from the audience, there's a couple of things that I wanted to ask with you. The organisations who approach you, what tends to be the reason that they do approach EcoMerit? Is it seeking to find cost savings, or is it because of a sustainability agenda within the organisation itself?
It's a mixture. When I started back in 2009, to be perfectly honest, it was all about cost savings. I set up EcoMerit in the teeth of a recession. All businesses at that time were very much in survival mode. So the selling point for EcoMerit was, we can save you real money. Since then, that's gradually changed. And I'd say especially over the last year in particular, environmental considerations have become much more common as a motivating factor for the companies that come to us. So cost savings are still important, they always will be, but it's good to see that there's a broader range of reasons now. It's not just all about money. And as I say, the staff retention thing as well, it is one of the most interesting things, I think, that again, it's in the last year I've really noticed that. Companies we're talking to are now saying that they're concerned about attracting the right caliber of people or keeping the right caliber of people, and that they need to present a company that especially younger employees actually want to work for. And to me, that's phenomenal. That's a really encouraging development.
And within the SME sector, if you look at large scale organizations, if you look at PLCs, you'll tend to find, I mean, I take Unilever as a case in point. Unilever had a senior vice president responsible for sustainability. That was their day in, day out job, and it was to reform the organization. Very few SMEs could afford the cost base of having one individual tasked with a role like that. So who do you find tends to take responsibility for it? Is it organic throughout the organization, or does it require an MD or a CEO to say, I'll own this?
Yeah, you've actually hit the nail on the head there. Because the larger companies, as you say, they'll have an environmental manager. He might also be their quality manager or their health and safety manager, and it's his full-time job to do this kind of stuff. With SMEs, there is no such person. And it's now, as I said, it's beginning to be more recognized as something that needs to be done. And the whole idea behind EcoMerit is to make it so simple that you don't need a full-time commitment to achieve the right results. So we design things to be as simple as we possibly can, because we recognize that, look, there's most small companies, there's no way they can afford to have somebody full-time looking at this stuff. This has to be a part-time job. It has to be something that can be mixed with other roles. And in answer to your question, the person involved, if the company is big enough to have a facilities manager, it very often will be the facilities manager, because he or she is already looking at energy use and efficiency of the building and so on. If there's no facilities manager, it can be the business owner. Certainly in smaller companies, it very often is. It very often also is just someone who has shown themselves to be enthusiastic. Maybe someone within the company, they may be a manager, they may not, depends on the size of the company as well, but just who has expressed interest and gone out of their way to kind of promote this within the company. And that person very often then can be the person that we're dealing with as our main contact.
Can I ask you as well, and by the way, folks, if you want to ask anything, I'll come to you in 2 seconds, and if there's other questions to follow, let me know. Just one on the back of that, Phil. Is there a trend in terms of the type of SMEs who are coming to you? Because again, if I go to the large scale, the PLCs and the big corporates, there's a lot of white collar entities. There's private equity houses, there's banks who have decided that they will put their money literally where the sustainability mouth is, that they'll make ostensibly white collar decisions in terms of sustainability. In SMEs, do you see the same pattern, or do you see an assumption that it's only for the manufacturing companies or the transport or logistics companies who have a sufficiently high enough carbon footprint that they feel they can make a difference? Do the professional services firms think this isn't for us?
No, it's across the board. I mean, our portfolio of members ranges from home-based companies working from home to some quite large companies. They're not SMEs. We've got like pharmaceutical plant, hospitals, stuff like that. And there's no one sector or one size of company that kind of sticks out that says, oh, we have a very large cohort here. One thing that we certainly have noticed recently, we had one new member join us, and one of their motivations was in accessing funding. because they needed to show environmental responsibility and so on to access the funding they wanted at the interest rate they wanted. So again, that was quite interesting. That was a new development for us to see. And I suspect there'll be more and more of that happening. So companies who need investment probably now are starting to look at the whole ESG picture, apart from anything else, just as a requirement to get that investment. Yeah.
Of course, we're seeing that, the UK obviously had that with NatWest, but we're seeing that in Ireland with AIB and Bank of Ireland now leading with green loans and specific interest rates for low carbon loans. We have a question here. Does anybody else want to ask anything? Okay, we'll go here first and then I'll come to you. Yes.
Hi, Phil. Good morning. Thank you for your talk. You mentioned the green ribbon and the idea of having an attachment to companies to help them tender for commercial contracts. And we've seen that being pushed, I suppose, by the dairy industry for being through Origin Green. So I would ask you, have you seen come through your SMEs commercial requirements as approved suppliers from the company, or when they're entering contract negotiations to prove green credentials at that level?
The question related to the green ribbon and the green certification for companies pitching for tender. And the final part was whether or not he had seen that outside the dairy industry. Was that correct?
Yeah, as in the SMEs he's dealing with, has he seen that come through when their negotiations become approved suppliers from another company, or as part of, say, the tender or mandate they're answering to become a supplier?
So are you seeing it among the SMEs that you're working with, Phil, where there is a requirement on them to prove green credentials as part of the procurement processes?
Yes, we're seeing that. I would say maybe 10% of our membership that might apply to. So, and it's happening more and more where SMEs will get a questionnaire in from a potential buyer, and it will ask them about the environmental or ESG now performance and so on, and they want to answer that question. And a good way of answering that is saying, well, we have an EcoMerit certification. So we're seeing that a little bit. We, I think, should be seeing it a lot more. And as I say, one of my hobby horses is I think, our government has a massive purchasing power, and government should be doing that. They should be requiring any contract, any public money going to any commercial company. That company should be able to demonstrate, either through certification or other means, but they should be able to demonstrate their green credentials, green responsibility. Otherwise, we should not be sending public money to these companies. Personal viewpoint.
And one, Phil, you would have thought that was relatively easy to institute. I mean, if you go through, if anybody who's dealt with e-tenders or the government procurement protocol or process, there are basic requirements for tax certification, for levels of public indemnity. It wouldn't take a massive upheaval in legislation to include some level of green certification. We have another question, by the way. After this gentleman, does anybody else want to ask anything else? Yes, sir. Fire ahead.
Hi, Phil. Good morning. My question is, you've emphasised that reducing power usage is the best way to, is the best solution. And certainly that would be my experience. We changed our lighting to LED, spent about €80,000, and our return on investment would be under 2 years. So we also have price of solar and a return on investment, and even at higher prices now, it's 4 to 5 years. So there's still a big, I suppose, at the top level, there seems to be a big push to put solar, wind farms, etc. in, and we're investing heavily as sort of a big kind of, at a government level, there's a big push that we're going to suddenly become, we're going to have thousands of wind farms around the country, and we're going to export green energy. But would it not be a much better bang for our buck at a state level, as you said, to fund reduction in energy usage? And even at a company level, if when you look at the meters you have in your company, you're paying your public service obligation levies based on your maximum income and capacity on your bill. Most companies, that's too high. It's much higher than it needs to be because they don't know what they actually use. There's loads of low-hanging fruit. And would that not be, from a cost-saving point of view, should we not be pushing that at a national level more?
Phil, I'm sure you got all of that, but just in case and for the purposes of my new role as amplifier, let me just restate some of it. The gentleman was citing his own experience of an 80,000 return on investment and a switch to LED light bulbs, a 4-year return on investment and a switch to application of solar. Significant, as he described it, low-hanging fruit available like that in the SME sector. So is that not what government should be fostering rather than the big capital changes to the grid and wind farms and all the rest of it?
The short answer, we need both. I mean, we need to divest ourselves from fossil fuels, so we do need the big investments in wind farms, solar farms, and so on. But equally, businesses should be reducing their requirement, and a good way to do that after they've done the LED lights and all the more straightforward stuff is looking at certain things like solar panels. I mean, we're seeing a massive increase in interest in solar panels because prices have been coming down, and the kind of payback time now, it used to be about 10 years to put up solar panels on your roof on a factory, say, is now down to about 4 or 5 years. So that's like a 20% payback. That's a very good investment now. So, you know, it makes huge sense if you have a background load which can use all the electricity of an array. It makes huge sense to do exactly that and put up an array on available space, whether it's a ground array or a roof or whatever, because there's massive savings in your own energy use and your own energy costs, and the payback is, I think, very attractive nowadays. Yeah.
I have one final question that I want to ask you, Phil, but I'm conscious of hogging you, so I just want to check. Does anybody else want to ask anything before? Oh my God, there's a sudden rush to get in. All right, we have 3, I think, so we'll start this way and then work our way across. Yes, sir.
Phil mentioned that EcoMerit was an alternative to ISO 14000. So I guess, you know, to get this certification, ISO will cost around 10 to 20K. How much will it cost to get a certification with EcoMerit? That's the first question. And the second question is, does EcoMerit provide a path to ISO 14000?
Okay, very good. Phil, cost of ISO 14001 is around 10K. How do you weigh up by comparison with EcoMerit, and is EcoMerit a gateway drug on the route to ISO 14000?
Yeah, okay, excellent question. 2 questions rolled into one. Yeah, it can be a gateway. We have a number of clients who have used EcoMerit as a stepping stone to a longer term objective of achieving ISO 14001. So these have included the likes of Danone down here in Wexford. Their big baby formula factory there started out with EcoMerit certification 10 years ago, and they achieved ISO 14001, I think, about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So it is a very good stepping stone if that's your objective. In terms of costs, EcoMerit is rather cheaper. It's cheaper in 2 ways. The initial cost is usually lower, but also for ISO 14001, what you normally need to do is employ a consultant to get you ready for the assessor. So the 10,000 you're spending on the assessor will be matched by probably at least another 10,000 paying the consultant to get your system set up and running. One of the beauties of EcoMerit is you do not need that consultant. It's such a simple system. You don't need independent audit because there's only 4 basic requirements, as I explained earlier. So it's much, much more straightforward, simple to implement, and you don't need to employ consultants to get you there. Yeah.
And I'm sure, Phil, you're available subsequent to this conference for direct contact if anybody should choose. Okay, we had how many more questions? One, just one? One. Same one? Are you're joining up? Do you trust each other? Okay, we'll see what you asked. Yes, go ahead.
So my question is from the recruitment and retention direction, right? So how have you observed the communication of sustainability in terms of recruitment and retention among the clients? So apart from the tangible, aspects, the energy savings and all of that, what about the processes? How do you communicate that to incoming candidates and internally to your employees? How do you communicate your sustainability strategy and certification, in all of that process?
And Phil, just to restate that, whatever about doing it, how do you get existing staff? How do you get potential staff if it's recruitment? How do you get stakeholders, suppliers, whoever, to understand what you're doing, to know what you're at, and to recognize the commitment you've made?
Okay, yeah. I'm an engineer, so I'm a great believer in numbers. I love numbers. So one of the most tangible things you can do is publish your performance. So the graph that I showed, for example, of the carbon footprint, every EcoMerit member company has one of these as one of the fundamentals. And we always recommend, publish that on your website. put it up on the notice boards within the company. Show people what you're doing, and support that also by the actions. So you might do a little narrative around that. Say, okay, we've reduced our footprint by 10% last year. We did this by A, B, and C. Next year, we're aiming to do D, E, and F, and we think that's going to reduce us by another 15%. That kind of stuff, I think, is very important. And to be fair, actually, our members aren't great at that. I'd like to see them do more of it, kind of selling themselves more about what they're achieving. As I say, by putting it on their website, by every social media and so on now as well. I'm a bit of an old dinosaur. I'm not into social media myself, but I understand that it's quite a powerful tool these days for making people aware of what you're about and what you're doing. So all these kind of things. And to me, the difference between a company that can put numbers on something and say, we have reduced our footprint by X%, we have reduced our waste by X%. To me, that's much, much more powerful than somebody who has a policy and a statement that says, we're doing all these great things, we're doing canal cleanups, we're improving our segregation, whatever, but not being able to put any kind of number on it. So to me, maybe because I'm an engineer, numbers are essential. That's what gives you credibility. And numbers that you can stand over, of course.
Well, I think we have one final question then. Was it an overlap or is it separate?
Hi, just in relation to remote working, do you calculate carbon emissions for remote workers as part of your certification? And if so, I suppose, how would you suggest doing that when you have over 100 engineers working remotely?
There's a very good question, Phil. If you have me at home working and I have the gas boiler running and the window open and I open fire in the corner, am I counted?
Yeah. Okay, good point. I mean, we have, because of COVID, for the last 2 years, we have been working entirely remotely. So normally we do physical site visits, and we've just restarted them this year. But for the last 2 years, we were doing everything remotely. We were doing our surveillance visits by Zoom calls. And for 2 years, that was okay. But I'm delighted that we're back out actually on site, seeing things that are actually happening, because there's no substitute for that. And I apologize for my virtual appearance today. I would have loved to have been with you in person.
Hang on, Phil. I want to push this a bit further. I think what the core of the question is, if you have an organization where a lot of their workforce is remote, do you incorporate their energy usage in their home places as part of your analysis of the entity?
Yes, yeah, we've just developed a new tool, actually. We call it a home working workbook. And what we do is for staff who are home working, it's just a little questionnaire on an EcoMerit Excel spreadsheet. So it asks them about the BER rating of their house, the size of the house, how it's heated and so on, how many hours per week they're working there, how many other people are sharing the house at the same time they're working, and it then calculates the carbon footprint and the energy use that's attributable to the business for them working at home. It also has the option of calculating the commute that you've avoided by not going to work. It asks you how many miles would that, or how many kilometers that would be, what is your mode of transport, and it calculates the footprint of that. And it can then tell you how much carbon you have saved by working at home. So this is a new thing we just developed last year, and it's quite popular and it's very useful. In fact, we're just about to certify our first company who works entirely remotely. They've got, I think, 7 employees all working remotely. They closed down their office last year due to COVID, and they found that they actually didn't need it. So they've just cleared out of it. They've stopped paying the rent and they're working entirely remotely. And so they will be our first kind of multi-site company working entirely remotely. And we can show that their footprint by doing that has reduced by more than half.
Phil, I'm conscious of your time. If anybody wants to follow up, whether it be with starting the process of ISO accreditation or anything else, where do they get you?
You can email me at phil@ecomerit.ie is probably the easiest way. Or just do a Google search for EcoMerit. And you'll find our website, you'll find our pricing structure, you'll find case studies there as well of some of the companies we work with. So you'll find some useful information there. You'll also find a list of all our current certificate holders with contact details, and you're very welcome to contact any of these individuals to ask them what they think about EcoMerit and what their experience has been.
Phil, really appreciate your time. We're going to head for coffee and we'll return, folks, at 11 o'clock. But just by way of thanks, will we give a round of applause, please? Phil Walker. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you very much.